Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Freely. So today we're going to be talking about the SCN mode, or the special scenes mode, on the Canon M50. So if you've ever picked up your Canon M50 and saw on the mode dial right there, it has like an SCN. If you've been wondering what that's for, today we're going to be talking all about it, who's it for, and what does it do in today's video. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, I'm Freely and I make videos about cameras, including tutorials and reviews, with a main focus on the Canon M50, but not limited to that. If any of that interests you, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. The special scene mode on the Canon M50 is basically a collection of auto modes that all compile together and kind of make it easier for people who are just beginning in photography to be able to set it to that specific mode, and the camera will pretty much change those settings to that certain scene that you want to take. So just like how auto mode is basically a set it and forget it, the camera will do pretty much all the work in terms of settings. The special scene mode is a little bit different because you have control over which scene you want. So for example, if you're shooting a landscape, you can change it to landscape mode and it'll do all the different setting changes for you. And likewise, if you're trying to shoot portraits, it'll change all the settings that are optimal for portrait photos. So it's basically like a more beefed up version of the auto mode. I have to note that most of what you can achieve in the special scene mode can be achieved in the other settings on the camera, so like manual, AV, TV, P, or just like in post-production like in Lightroom or Photoshop. Oh yeah, and this only works for photos. And with that said, grab your M50, spin the dial to special scene mode, and let's get started. So let's just go one by one, starting with the very first setting here, which is self-portrait. So this is pretty self-explanatory. If you hit the Q in the top right hand corner of the screen, you also get a couple extra features. So you also have this smooth skin feature. It allows you to control how smooth your skin wants to be. So like I said, this is like a setting that you can get in probably Lightroom or Photoshop, not necessarily in the camera, but that's a pretty cool thing you can control. You can also control the background blur in this setting, from very blurred or very sharp, depending on how you want it. But what's great about the self-portrait mode, as soon as you change it to that mode, it automatically comes with the self-timer. So it's not like in the other modes where you have to manually set it. You can pretty much set it to this self-portrait mode and automatically be on. So this is pretty simple. It's a self-portrait mode. It has a timer, smooth out your skin, and has an option to make your background blurry or sharp depending on how you want it. And all of these can be achieved in the other manual AV TV modes, except for the smoother skin. You'll have to use a tool like Lightroom or Photoshop if you want to do things like that. So after self-portrait, you have portrait mode. So portrait is pretty self-explanatory. You know, if you're taking portraits of people, this is the setting that you would set it to, but it's not impossible to do this in the other modes. You can definitely turn it to AV or even manual if you want to have that blurry background and have like your subject really stand out from the background. So this also applies that skin smoother. It's really cool that it does it right in camera. So if you're a beginner and you want to take some cool portraits with a blurry background, definitely try this one out. Next thing on my list is smooth skin. Oh wow, she's actually cute. But anyways, smooth skin, it's pretty much just a skin smoother. So if you don't have the resources to get like Lightroom or Photoshop and you just want like smooth skin, in here you can definitely adjust how smooth you want your skin. If you want it super high like you're a baby, or you know, just light skin smoothing to make it a little bit more natural. But yeah, so this is if you just want to take photos with smooth skin. Very similar to the portrait one, but I guess they had to make an entire setting just for this. So the next thing on my list is the landscape mode. So similarly on how you change the camera to auto and it kind of just dials in all the settings for you. Say you want to take a landscape, you would change it to this one and it would pretty much put all the settings in for you for taking landscapes. Of course, you can just shoot in manual, and if you know how to change all the settings, you can definitely just use other modes. But if you don't know how to use all the different settings, landscape will be the way to go. What this basically does is just make it a very wide depth of field, so it keeps the foreground and the background all in focus and very sharp. So it does that all for you. Next we have sports. So this is really good. It just raises the shutter speed, and if you listen here, so it takes a very rapid burst of shots and it does all the setting changes for you. If you're shooting a scene with just a lot of action, this is what you would set it at. So yeah, sports, pretty simple. So next thing we have is close-up. So close-up is really handy if you're like taking pictures of flowers or just really tiny things like ants or bees, or you can get creative. But this one will change all the settings to take pictures of things that are really small, hence the name close-up. Yeah, pretty simple. Next thing we have is food. So this is used for culinary photography. This just basically adds an extra vibrance to the photos. If you hit that little Q in the corner, Q in the corner, it has an option to change the color tone or the temperature of the actual image. You have the choice to make it more cooler or make it more warmer. Just as a note, the more warmer the picture is, the more vibrant it looks and the more, like, I guess, tasty the food looks. But that's totally up to you. You can make it cooler or warmer depending on what you're shooting. So I'm sure if you have a smartphone, your smartphone probably has like that food filter when you're taking photos. So this is pretty much the Canon M50's equivalent to that. So the next thing we have is panning. So I didn't know initially what this exactly is for. If we have sport panning, it says automatically sets the shutter speed for panning, so it keeps images sharper with compatible lenses. So you have to have certain lenses that are compatible with this certain special mode, but that still didn't make sense. Just why couldn't you just use the sports mode? So I looked up in the manual, and the manual, it says it's used to convey a sense of motion by keeping the subject clear and sharp while the background is blurred. So like say you're trying to take a photo of like a car and it's moving, it'll try to keep the car in focus while leaving the background blurred. So this is a very interesting one. I don't really have much to say about this, but yeah, it's in there. So these next three special modes are, I think, the most useful modes out of all of these ones I just talked about. So the first thing is going to be the handheld night scene mode. So this is really handy if you're, out at night in the city, or it's just very dark and you don't have a tripod. Because as you know, if you try taking pictures at night, you have to use very different settings as opposed to shooting in the daytime. So sometimes it can be really hard to balance the ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture. So this kind of alleviates that slightly, and it makes it a little bit easier, because what it does, it takes 4 consecutive shots, and it does so all in succession. So for example, I'm not in a dark place, or maybe I am. It's kind of dark here, so maybe if I use it here. So it takes 4 consecutive shots and kind of just combines them together to like hopefully get enough light and make a good image. So it actually looks really good. I'll try to put this picture up, but it basically combines all 4 photos together, and I think this is one of the most useful features in this special mode because sometimes you just don't want to think about the settings and you just want to take pictures. So I find myself using this sometimes when we're out and the place we're at is very dark. So this just makes shooting just a lot more easier and more fun. Next is the HDR backlit control. So this is used to really retain more detail in the dark shadows and in the bright light areas. So what this does is also take 3 pictures. So for example, so according to the manual that I found for the M50, it says 3 consecutive images are captured at different brightness levels each time you shoot, and the camera combines image areas with optimal brightness to create a single image. This mode can reduce the washed out highlights and loss of detail in HDR backlit shadows that tend to occur in shots with mixed bright and dark control image areas. So that's just a fancy way of saying that's taking 3 different photos with 3 different brightnesses and putting it together to hopefully one is going to correct the other one's going to correct the other, and kind of just makes a balanced image, and it brings up the shadows in the other and then retains detail in the bright areas. But yeah, this is a really cool mode to be shooting in. Definitely recommended. So last mode we're going to be talking about is the silent mode. So this is really useful in situations where and shutter actually making sound is just not appropriate. So maybe like in places where you have to be very quiet. So this is really cool feature to have. So if you just, I'm gonna take a picture. It still makes a little bit of a sound, but it's way different from, for example, just a regular shot like that, So the silent shutter is a really cool feature to have, but the only downside is going to be that it's going to only shoot in auto. There's no way to change the ISO, shutter speed, aperture, and any of that. So if you're gonna be shooting in this mode, just know that it's all gonna be auto, and you're pretty much gonna what you see is what you're gonna get kind of situation. The camera is gonna pretty much take full reign of control over how your images are gonna look. So if you're brand new to photography and you just want to get out there and start shooting pictures, but you kind of don't want to go into the settings quite yet, this is a great starting point because it kind of gives you the prior knowledge of what those certain pictures are supposed to look like. So it kind of dips your toes into those different kind of photos, but eventually you can learn how to take pictures using the other modes like AV, TV, P, and manual. I think manual is the most scariest one for most people. And like I said at the beginning of the video, most of these modes are achievable using the manual, TV, AV program, or just stuff like in post-production like in Lightroom. So it's definitely achievable without having to use a special scene mode. And my suggestion to those learning is to eventually move over to those different modes, AV, TV, manual, and P, because you get more control over what kind of image comes out of this camera. So the last three modes that I talked about, which are the handheld night scene, HDR backlit control, and the silent mode, are going to be, in my opinion, the most useful modes in this collection of modes, because it introduces a new and helpful tool while you're shooting that you can't quite get from the other modes. So in my opinion, you can totally use those last three ones even though you're like a more advanced user of the M50. I still use some of those things from time to time, so don't be afraid to use it. Just use it. Like, as long as you can get photos that look good and you know that you like, then I don't see what the problem is. So in my next video, I'm going to be talking about the creative filters on the Canon M50. So these ones are a little bit different from the different scenes because these ones are actually like filters and they have very different looks compared to just being like a landscape photo or a portrait photo. So yeah, stay tuned for when I post that video. If you guys got some value from this video, make sure you hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. With all that said, thank you guys so much for watching this video. The growth on this channel is just crazy. In just like a couple of days, we went from 1,000 subscribers all the way to 1,030, which is so crazy. I can't believe we're growing so fast. So I just want to thank you guys for all the new subscribers. Welcome. We'll be doing that 1,000 subscriber video very soon, so stay tuned for that. But with all that said, thank you guys so much for watching once again, and I'll see you guys in the next one.